and then we're good to go. At this stage, before we go any further, we'd like to point out a couple of things. These phase leads are best cable tied down while you have access to it. If they ever work way loose, you end up with a high resistant joint here, and then eventually burns out your controller board. It's a very expensive failure, so you want to avoid that. The other thing you should do is, while you have access to the controller, is change out your main fuse. If you still got a 125 amp fuse, that'll blow on you. It will. It could be tomorrow, it could be in a year's time, but pushing a 200 kilo bike is really, really hard work. Take my word for it. So while you have access to it, change out the fuse. Okie dokie. So now we're going to move on. I'm going to put the plastic rear cover on. If I've got one handy. Plastic rear cover looks like this. If you want it to look real pretty and see through it, you just take off the white layer, otherwise it doesn't really matter. You get a fair bit of static when you do that, so feel free to zap someone while you're at it. Now, and this particular one is an early version, so the depth isn't quite thick enough. For our one, we're going to prop it up with a couple of spacers, and the later production ones, it'll be thicker and there'll be grooves cut, so you can fit the wires through without. In our case, we've used wooden spacers. You won't need to do this, but this is why we're showing it here. So you drop this down there, making sure you're not getting any of your phase wires tangled up, and just sit it on top. Okay, that's the first one done. Alrighty, now we've moved on to putting the top layer on. The first thing you do is insert this spacer against the two rails there for the batteries to go up against. This one's a pine one. In the kit it will actually be made of polycarbonate and be twice as thick, but that's what we're using at the moment. And then place the 12 cells that go on the top. On the front one, you want the positive to be in the middle and the negative on the middle, and then alternate all the way back. When you get your pack, please double-sided tape this blue box to the forward plastic cover, just like so, and then take the lid off, so that when you're going to wire it, it's easier to get to. Then you insert it on in. Again, this time for our for the prototype we have to use some spacers because I got the dimensions wrong, but in the actual kit it'll be correct, so you don't have to do quite this bit.
Look, I can chamfer that off.
Yeah.
Stop.
Okay, now at this stage we're going to start putting the top cells in. The first thing you want to do is put this spacer in at the bottom. You want it against these two beams for forward strength, so that when you're braking hard, your batteries don't try and join you in the front, because that's not very good at all. This one's made of pine. In the kit it'll be made of polycarbonate. This is just a prototype at the moment. Next you'll want to be putting the 12 cells in above. You want to make sure that the inner two here are positive and negative, and then alternate all the way back through. Once you've done that, then you want to look at putting the forward plastic cover on. Before you do that, you want to glue or attach the blue box to the this polycarbonate cover. We use double-sided tape. It doesn't have to be hugely securely fixed because it's not going to have a lot of shock load on it. So double-sided sticky tape is probably the best way. Then we want to lower this. Oh, actually, shove them there. The kit will have the correct spacing on the on this cover, so that you won't need to use spacers like we are. But we didn't build ours so perfectly this time round. And we want to lower that down into there, making sure none of these wires touch anything. Also making sure that you don't crush your temperature sensor board. And above. You might need to persuade it somewhat to get it in. There we go. That's just because these welds the manufacturing tolerance on these welds is not great. They're usually out by a mil or two, so it's a little bit wider up here than it is down there. And once you got it down, you want to make sure you're not crushing any wires, mainly from the temperature sensor boards. You might take the opportunity to attach this temperature sensor board to the plastic cover. Sorry.
No.
Now, at this stage, we'd like to connect this. I pilfered this from the metal hydride battery pack. You may need to as well, or it might be included in the kit. You want it in this form, so you want to have removed all the sticky tape and crap that holds it together, so you can get it nice and wide apart. Now, you want to make sure that the polarity on the Anderson connector matches that of the bottom battery. So on the positive side, we'll take the positive lead, and then feed it underneath the BMS module on the positive most cell. You won't need a lower washer because it's much thicker than the other interconnects. You just put a spring washer and then put it in. Only needs to be finger tight. Leaving the Anderson off to the side for a moment, you do exactly the same for the negative. If it will comply with you. Eventually you get it in, and then we can finally tighten down all of these 4-volt bolts with the drill. Cool. Alrighty, now that we've got the forward plug attached, I'm going to put the top cover on, or the bottom cover rather. What we have to do is slide it in, make sure you're not pinching any wires, and it should just fall straight in there. Sometimes it won't. Sometimes you just have to brute force it. There we go. And you've got to make sure you're not crushing into the wires underneath. So you've got to make sure the wires go into the grooves cut into the plastic. Making sure the temp sensor board is coming up through the gap between the two covers. And you're all well. Now we're moving on to wiring up the top cells. On this one I've laid out the interconnects as they should be. You can get away with this one because you've got more access because it's further up. Now we want to be taking our 6 BMS strings, and you're going to start bolting them on. Just as before, we're going to use bolt and a spring washer and a BMS module and another washer. Once again, just to make sure that the middle of the BMS module doesn't bend on the cell vent. Just like so. So we have the top interconnects and the BMS modules all connected up. We've taken the opportunity to connect the 2 cables that go to the motor controller. On these ones we're using the bolt, spring washer, BMS module, and then another washer underneath, because the lugs of the controller are exactly the same width as the interconnects. On this side we have an Anderson, also pilfered from the metal hydride battery. We've cut it in half so we can plug them each side in independently. You'll notice here that the negative terminal of the top battery is on the positive side of the Anderson connector. That's so that we can connect the negative of this to the positive of the bottom battery. Doesn't quite work if we have this one being negative and that one being negative. It just causes great grief. On this one we've soldered the BMS modules to the master module of the battery management system. For the kit we'll actually have crimp lugs, so you plug them in, you don't have to solder them, but we connect this at this stage as well. It's very important that when you're doing the bottom modules that before you put any of this on, you make sure the two module lines are connected. I forgot to do that and had to pull it all out and put it all back again. Very, very frustrating, trust me.